We have MST2 Eric Post, has been in the Coast Guard for 6 years and worked in the marine environmental response field for 3. His primary duties are as a pollution responder and a federal on-scene coordinator representative. He is originally from Sydney, Australia, but was raised in Orlando, Florida, and he has a BA in history from University of Central Florida and was a high school teacher prior to joining the Coast Guard. And joining him will be MSTC Dale Walker, who has served in the Coast Guard for 18 years and worked in the marine environmental response and marine safety fields for 16 years. As Sector's Incident Management Division Supervisor, his responsibilities include serving as Federal On-Scene Coordinator Representative during environmental responses and acting as a Division Group Supervisor in Sector's Incident Command Structure. He's originally from Tallahassee, Florida, and holds a BS in Environmental Studies from American Military University.
Good morning. Like Monica said, I'm MST2, that's a Marine Science Technician, 2nd class. Don't let the name fool you though. I'm not a scientist like most of the people here are. All right, so I'm gonna briefly talk about a basic introduction to what the Coast Guard does as far as pollution response, because I know a lot of people, myself included before I joined the Coast Guard, didn't know the Coast Guard even does that. So talk about exactly what we do on the day-to-day basis and a little bit how we incorporate science into our responses. So we respond to any discharge of oil or a release of a hazardous substance into U.S. navigable waterways, which is basically, if you just see a waterway that you could put a boat into or a jet ski into, you can probably consider it a navigable waterway. All right, we also issue monetary penalties to people who actually discharge or release those hazardous substances. And then we direct the responses both directly and indirectly. So what I mean by that is, well, okay, the penalties, yeah, we do that, but typically we try to work with people. We are like kinder, softer Coast Guard. So we try to help people learn from their mistakes as opposed to just negatively punishing them, especially since if they're recovering their own oil, it actually gets very expensive. So indirectly and directly, the way we do this is indirectly, we go to actual responses. In the National Contingency Plan, the on-scene coordinator is tasked with overseeing oil recovery operations. And as the representative of the OSC, the FOSCR, that's basically what I do. So when we have a discharge, most day-to-day discharges, especially in an area like this where it's very sensitive, you get smaller discharges, you know, a couple of gallons here and there. But what we do is we go out, but if it's slightly larger than that, we go out and we make sure that they're doing things properly and safely. So what we do is we'll oversee, make sure they're doing things right. We make sure they're doing things safe. We just make sure people are wearing all the proper PPE, that kind of stuff. The other thing we do, which I'll get into in a minute, is make sure that people are acting in accordance with the area contingency plan, which is basically the smaller local area of the national contingency plan. Now, directly is what happens if we go out into the field and someone is unable or unwilling to conduct a response on their own. So, and typically you see people that just can't afford it, right? It's expensive. Getting oil out of the water is not efficient. It's not always an exact science. It's not easy. So that's where we can take over. What we do is we utilize the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund to either partially or entirely take over an oil spill response. And that's usually something we'll do in larger responses, or if it's ones that we just don't have the owner for. So what I can do with that is I have the ability to open up the fund and start spending that money to properly remove the fuel from the water, whether it's oil, it could be fuel, it can be like crude oil, it could be asphalt, which is usually a group 5, that's oil that sinks, which gets very complicated and very expensive very quickly. But we can do all that. And then don't worry, it's not that money isn't free. As soon as we're done with the cleanup, we're gonna try to actively recuperate that money from the person who actually discharged the oil. So that's basically what we do in a nutshell. All right, so how we use science to actually conduct our responses. One way we do it is through oil fingerprinting. So we can take oil samples. So you can see like in this picture here, if you have like a marina like that, it's very, very difficult to determine where a discharge may be coming from. So once bilge kicks on, kicks a couple gallons of diesel, and it can make a big mess very quickly. There's no way to tell exactly where it came from. So what we can do is we can take samples from both the oil in the water and the oil out of bilges, usually their main target, to see exactly which boat may have been the discharge. What we do with that is we take these samples and we ship them to the Marine Safety Lab, which is in New London, Connecticut. And they can actually identify oil. It's like a fingerprint is the easiest way to talk about it, is that it's very unique and you can track exactly where that oil may have come from. And that way we can figure out who's responsible, one, for the cleanup, and two, who I'm going to give a ticket to. So that's basically it. But it's much more, it's beyond the scope of something that I'm able to do on my own, which is why we have to utilize Marine Safety Lab and the scientists we have that work there. And the one other thing that we do that uses science, and I actually stole, Pete, that must be where your slide went, because I have the zoomed in of the ACP right there.
You stole it.
So the GRS, it's Geographic Response Strategies, which is just an updated term that means the exact same as the GRP, Geographic Response Plan, is in the Area Contingency Plan, which is publicly available. And you can kind of, I use this regularly, like that's my job. My main job is to be familiar with this plan. So you have, like you said, you can see endangered species areas like shorelines here where like there's sea turtles nesting sites. But then also what I use it for is you can see like these triple diamonds like in here. That gives me an idea of like the most important areas to boom first. If we have a large scale spill, what are the most important areas? Because I can look at an environmental sensitivity index map all day long as a relative layman. I'm not a scientist. And I can look at all the different types of endangered species in the area or the areas like greater commercial value. But I'm not necessarily going to know, me personally, exactly what is the way to boom first. What do I protect first, right? So this plan has been created with a number of organizations involved, and that actually guides us. So I can know, just looking at it, anyone can know, just looking at it, oh, hey, this is triple diamond. That's really important. I need to boom that first. And also tell you, you can see the boom. I'm not sure if it's very visible, but it will actually tell you exactly how much boom you need in certain areas, the exact lengths required to protect those spots. So it's very useful. And without the scientific research and the mapping that goes into it, it would just be me rolling the dice on what the area is. So another thing that we do is not just, we don't just follow the ACP ourselves, use the GRS, is we also regulate facilities like bulk liquid transfer facilities that transfer large quantities of fuel and oil, right, in the area. So you go to like the Port of Tampa, Port Manatee, there's large facilities that are transferring large amounts of oil. And what we do is we review their plans to make sure that their plans have to involve any areas that are nearby. It has to be included in their plan so that I know that they're familiar with it. Now, anyone could just include that plan in their plan, right? I just say, take the pages out and put it in the back, which is why we do annual inspections. And then we also oversee exercises, both unannounced and announced, with those facilities. So what we'll do is we'll go to one of these facilities every 3 years at the actual absolute most is every 3 years we can test them. And we'll say, hey, you had a discharge at your facility. I want to see you actually follow your plan, and which is in accordance with the area contingency plan, and actually conduct a response and do it appropriately. And that way I know, hey, you don't just have this picture in there, you actually know how to do it. Because the last thing we want is for a facility that's, can discharge as much as 20,000 gallons of diesel right in like downtown Tampa area. For the first time then to be looking at this plan to be when that happens, right? So we want to make sure they conduct their exercises and that I can actually see them conduct their exercises and that they know how to properly respond. And so that's the main ways we use science. And without further ado, I can pass it on to how we coordinate those groups as well as volunteer opportunities.
Again, my name is Dale Walker with the Coast Guard. Just quickly, I know we already went over a few of the organizations that we work with commonly. We are part of the National Response Team. We are co-chairs with the EPA and also the RRT. We serve as vice chair with the RRT. Again, down at the bottom are some teams, specialized teams that we work with, scientific support coordinators, and some of the other ones on the bottom. Here are the agencies that we most commonly work with here in Florida. DEP, we've heard from them in depth, so I won't go back over that. NOAA, we use them for spill trajectory and a few other, or many other items. And then the EPA, which we are basically work with them is they will handle anything inland, and we respond to anything coastal. And in the state of Florida, DEP also is responsible for coastal waters or state waters, where we are responsible for coastal waters. So we have a MOU with them, keeps us from duplicating efforts. And then real quick on volunteers, here are some of the ways that we use volunteers. We typically will not see volunteers unless it's a major incident or a large incident. The Coast Guard itself does not use volunteers, but we will work with volunteers inside of the uniform, the incident command system. Let's see, habitat surveyor, pre-impact shoreline cleanup, delivery, and runners. Some of the items there will actually require some training. For the habitat surveyor would be HAZWOPER. For the pre-impact shoreline would be just 4-hour training that we would come up with beforehand. Here's how you would get involved as a volunteer. Volunteer Florida is a good place to start, and they could actually plug you into areas where you could best serve with your particular skill set. And I think questions are at the end, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.